Today I'm going to show you how to make Tartine's country sourdough bread. I don't know. The pleasures of a 3-generation household. You never know who's going to walk by in a towel. All right. When I decided to start making sourdough, I was overwhelmed by the instructions. But when I actually got through it, I realized it was not as difficult as I thought to get to something really amazing. So I want to share the whole process with you today so that you can overcome whatever hurdles you might have to the process and start making amazing bread for your family. The first thing you need to do is get your starter going. So if you follow the instructions on New York Times cooking website for Tartine country bread, that process takes you about 1.5 weeks to 2 weeks to get a really vigorous starter going. I'm going to take you from having that starter through the bake of your first country loaf. So the night before you bake, you're going to make your leaven. And to make the leaven, you're going to take a tablespoon of your active starter. You're going to add 200 grams of 80-degree water, 100 grams of whole wheat flour, and 100 grams of bread flour. Mix that all together and let that sit the same way your starter sits, in this case for 12 hours overnight. And in the morning, you're going to do a float test to see whether your leaven is ready to bake. So you take a little piece of your leaven, you see if it's going to float in some water. And this is the do or die if you're ready. Oh my God, I think it's going to float. Yes!
Yay, Mom!
Look at this, my leaven floated. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay. The first thing we will do is measure out our ingredients and start mixing this together. Okay, we got about 200 grams there. Maybe need a pinch more. Then I need 700 grams of 80-degree water. Okay, now I'm gonna use my hands to disperse the dough. And I need 900 grams of bread flour and 100 grams of whole wheat flour. Okay, eventually I am going to also add 20 grams of salt, but I have to hydrate the dough before I add the salt. So this is gonna come a little bit later. First step of making this dough with Tartine is to hydrate the dough. One of the things that Tartine is trying to, I've seen explained again and again, is that you want to get the dough to do the work itself. So instead of doing a lot of kneading of the dough, you're giving it time for the gluten to build up and relax and build up and relax and for the yeast to do its job. So now we've got our dough nice and mixed up. We're just making sure we don't have any dry spots. We are going to cover this with a kitchen towel. You want to rest for at least 25, it can rest up to 40. I have let my dough hydrate for about 40 minutes, which is the amount of time it took to feed my kids lunch while they are doing their virtual classroom. And now we're going to add the salt and another 50 grams of water. So I'm going to sprinkle over the salt. This is 20 grams of salt. And I'm going to measure in. And again, this is my 80-degree water. So I'm going to measure 50 grams. I'm going to pour that over my salt. And then I'm going to start to work that in. Again, I'm going to work it in with my hands. This takes a little while for the water to mix into the dough. So you really need to get in there and start. You can cut the dough too. You can grab it with your fists and really chunk it up. It's okay, it will come back together as the water absorbs. But you really want to get in there and mix it up and get your salt dissolving. And what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing it, flipping it over, and kind of punching into it. This dough has come back together. I am going to let it rest. I'm going to give it 5 minutes, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do my first fold and show you how to start folding your dough for the bulk ferment. My dough has been resting for about 5 minutes. And now I am going to start the bulk ferment and do a series of turns. My dough usually takes about 4 hours to bulk ferment, but basically the recipe calls for anywhere between 3 and 4 hours. Time and patience are the key to a tartine bread. You may find that with your bread, you even need to let it rise a little bit longer than 3 or 4 hours, but you just kind of have to see how you get on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually move my dough into a smaller bowl, because I find that after you get through all this mixing, which the big bowl is really good for, the more tightly compacted the dough is, it kind of feeds on activity a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a friend to be in a smaller thing. So what we're doing with these folds, or turns is what they call them, is you're gonna basically just lift the dough up and lay it on top of itself. In this first turn, you're gonna do it more vigorously, and each time as you go along, you're gonna get a little bit more gentle with the dough. So for what we're gonna do is wet our hands, and then we're gonna grab underneath the dough, and we're gonna just gently kind of pull it up and fold it over itself, okay? Okay, so that's about 6 turns there. Now, I'm going to cover my dough with a towel, and I'm gonna actually put it into a proofing box that I have that I can control the temperature of. I'm gonna place my dough in covered. So the dough is gonna need to bulk ferment for about 3 or 4 hours. Every 30 minutes, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna turn the dough again. I won't show you that every time, but generally speaking, my dough usually takes about 4 hours. That means I do about 8 turns. And the farther into it I get, the more gentle I am. I don't sort of pull and stretch so much, but I'm just a little bit more gentle with it. I'll show you the last turn that I'm gonna do, and then we'll move on to the bench rest and shaping our loaves. I'm ready to do my final fold. I'm about 3.5, 4 hours into my bulk ferment. And my dough at this point is really pillowy. It's almost like marshmallowy, but lighter than marshmallow. So I'm gonna do my last fold, and I'm gonna do it kind of gently, and then give this a little bit more time, one last round. So you can see like the dough is much more slack than it was on our first fold. Okay, so that's gonna be one more 30-minute session, and then we'll see if it's ready to cut. My dough has now been in the bench rest for about 3.5, 4 hours. I gave it another 30 minutes after my last fold, my last turn, and now I'm ready to cut the dough. And I'm gonna be honest with you, this is where things get a little bit hairy for me. And my skills are not the greatest, but as you're gonna see, hopefully, with the bake, even with my imperfect skills at cutting the dough and shaping the dough, I've still ended up with great results. So don't let this part intimidate you, just do your best. So my dough has a nice dome shape, and I've got some bubbles on the top of the dough, which means we're ready to cut. So I'm gonna turn this out onto the surface of my counter here, and I'm gonna cut the dough in 2, and I'm gonna do a pre-shape, which is I'm just gonna kind of get it into a round shape, and then I'm gonna let it rest for a little bit. So let's see how this goes. So I'm gonna turn my dough out, and I'm gonna take a bench scraper and roughly estimate cutting this in half. This is where it gets tricky. Using sort of, I'm gonna pick up my dough here. You're supposed to use no flour whatsoever. Let's see if I manage to use no flour. I'm gonna start at 5 o'clock, and I'm just gonna swoop around in a circle until I get like a nice round shape. So this is the pre-shape. So here we go. Let's see if I can get something going here. Oh my God, not bad. Okay, first time I did this, I totally sucked at this. Okay, so this one's pretty good. So I've got a nice round shape there. Holy crap, I'm so happy. That was a disaster the last time I did it. Okay, let's see where we get on with this guy. Oh my God, I'm gonna go off my countertop. Okay, this is going a little bit more like it did before. Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy until I get this nice round. And I tip it in a little bit. Okay, see that I'm happy with. Okay, oh my God, that's so stressful. So you still see some bubbles on the surface of the dough, and I'm gonna let this do what's called a bench rest. We're gonna leave these here for about 20 minutes. So I've let these rest for about 20 minutes. You can see how much they've sort of expanded. And now we're going to actually shape our our dough into its final resting place for the final rise. This is the hard part. I'm going to pick it up and flip it over gently. Okay, that was better. All right, now I'm going to start that folding. I'm going to grab from the bottom, pull all the way up to the top. I'm going to grab my two sides, pull them out, fold over, fold over. Then I'm going to grab a thinner bit, not as much, create sort of a thin layer there, fold that down. Okay, now I'm going to grab the corners and I'm going to start buttoning it up. So grab a corner, pull it in, pulling in, pulling in, whoop, pulling in. Okay, feeling better about the tension here. Maybe do a couple more tucks, tuck, tuck. Okay, now I'm going to grab it at the top and kind of fold it over itself. Here we go. Oh, okay, I'm feeling good about that one. Again, you can just give it a few tucks if you need to. This one, I'm going to give it a tuck. Okay, anytime you touch the dough, you always want to give it a tiny rest. We're giving this a minute rest, and we'll be right back. While I'm waiting for those to rest for a minute after the final shaping, I'm going to prepare my bannetons. I just squirt some water in here, and then I'm going to dust it with a 50-50 mix of rice flour and whole wheat flour. Dust this generously because if you have some of that flour on your dough, when you flip it out, it makes more of a nice pattern when you do your slashing. So the final fold to put our dough into our baskets for the final rise, you're going to delicately pick up your dough and then you're going to fold it and drop it into your bannetons. At this point, you have two options. You can either let these rise on the counter for 3 hours and then do your bake, or you can put them in the refrigerator to let them rise overnight for 12 hours. If you put them in the refrigerator, just put a towel over them while they're rising in the refrigerator. And then in the morning, you can take them out of the refrigerator at the same time that you start to preheat the oven, and that's all the time they need to be out before you start to bake them. I'm gonna let these rise on the countertop covered for 3 hours, and then I'm gonna bake them. This is the nerve-wracking part, where you hope that you can flip something. Oh, wait, let me get my blade. Okay. Gotta work fast, not to lose the heat. And I'm not a good slasher, so this is always really nerve-wracking. Oh. Deep cut. Okay, that'll work. Turn the heat down a little bit. Oh my God, that looks gorgeous. Ooh. Oh, yes! Oh, and that is sourdough bread. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay, we have to let that cool. We can't cut into it yet. I want to show you the inside of my loaf. This has what's called a custard crumb. So if you can see inside some of those holes, there's like a shiny sheen to the surface, and that is the sign of some really good things. I also want to point out, this is far from a perfect loaf. You're going to see a lot more rise in professional bakers' loaves, and people who've been baking for a long time will get that nice rise, but this is only my second bake, and this bread is so stunningly delicious. So I really want to emphasize that you should get started on this. Don't worry about being perfect. You're going to make something amazing for your family, and this really brings so much joy into the house. So get baking, and I hope you enjoy the process as much as I did.